Hello everyone, and it is the 1800s here, and we are now into the Victorian era. So this was obviously named after Queen Victoria, who was on the throne from 1837 until 1901. And during this era, a lot of things changed. There was a lot of progress, and we're going to see our little, well, not little, our quite big town now change and grow with some of these new things that are happening. So at the start of this period, there was about 13.9 million people in Britain, and by the end there was 32.5 million by 1901. So it was a massive population increase. They thought that the population wouldn't actually grow that much at this time because there was a lot of poverty, and they thought famine and diseases and wars were going to cause, like, it would stop people from growing in population. But this didn't really happen, and because there was such an improvement in living conditions for most people, and they obviously had increasing health benefits over the century, this 100 years as well. It was the height of the British Empire as well, which spanned near enough almost the entire globe, from Australia to places in Asia, India, Africa, and they were all ruled by Queen Victoria. There were a few wars in this time. The first main war was the Opium Wars, because you gotta have a good war when you've come into China to get all the opium. And there was the Crimean Wars, which were the most famous ones in this sort of time period and lasted for a long time. There was the Boer Wars, and there was a mutiny in India as well, which would happen quite a lot. There was a lot of science and technological developments during this time period, and Britain was the leading country in this, and we created a lot of things that helped us develop as a industrial sort of nation. Especially, the main thing was the railways and creating steam trains and things like that, steam powered factories, and so we could mass produce a lot of new products like clothes and textiles and food goods and all sorts of things like that. And obviously, with the invention and the railways being involved, we could trade a lot of these products around the country really easily, and it also meant that people could travel around as well, which would be important socially as well. And sort of the main train stations that you'd find in London at this time was Paddington, Waterloo, King's Cross, kind of all the major train stations that everyone still uses today, and we're still using our wonderful Victorian train network. They also built a lot of canals as well, especially in big built up cities like Birmingham and Manchester, so they could create a canal network to ship all the cargo across the country. Obviously that declined over the years as steam became the way to go forward, and in 1858 the first sewer network was built as well, because obviously the sanitation was getting a bit out of hand, and obviously people were dying with that, so they built the first sewer system. It still went into the River Thames, but it was a start. They also made a gas system as well for lighting and heating homes, and that was around 1880s as well. Healthcare became a bit more of a predominant thing as well during this area. We had like proper doctors, and we also had the things things like dentists appeared because of the increasing amount of tooth decay because of the diet, and they were eating a lot more sugary things and obviously importing a lot of things from different countries as well. So we're getting a lot of different food ranges but not looking after anyone's teeth, and that's probably why the British were always known for having bad teeth, even though this is not true anymore. Also, anesthetic was first used during this century. It was used in 1799, the first time it was ever used, and that was using nitrous oxide or laughing gas. So that's pretty safe if you're going under any sort of procedure. They soon moved on to chloroform, and even Queen Victoria herself used this while she was in childbirth to ease the pain. And during this century there was a lot of poverty as the more and more people moved in from the countryside into the cities where all the jobs were, where we were having the Industrial Revolution. People flooded into the towns for the money, and sort of they thought they would have better lives and better working conditions, but the councils and the towns couldn't build these homes quick enough. So they found that there was extreme overcrowding, really poor sanitary conditions, because none of these places could keep up with the amount of people that were actually living in them. A lot of slums became a thing, and there were whole neighborhoods of just shanty towns and built like really awfully built houses. They also had no maintenance from the landlords either, because they didn't really care. All they wanted was money from these people, and rights than they had at the moment. Kind of, as I mentioned, the Great Exhibition was the world's first fair. It was held at Crystal Palace, and these were new big structures, especially along with Alexandra Palace, where they had built everything out of steel and glass to show off their engineering prowess. And they put on a exhibition of everything that was great about Britain and all the like different cultures. I think there was stuff from India and stuff from all the colonies, so it was a massive show, and the Americas and stuff as well. We also had people like Charles Darwin in this era, and obviously his book on the origin of species, which kind of revolutionized the religious and the scientific view of what they kind of thought happened with evolution, and it wasn't all about God creating the man and the woman. We also had the invention of the telephone in this area as well by Alexander Graham Bell, who obviously invented a lot of stuff as well. We also had Jack the Ripper, that famous classic murder story that has never been sort of solved and still people go on Jack the Ripper tours around the East End of London. And we also had obviously the schooling. There was free state education. Obviously before this, people would have to go to a private school where they'd have to pay and obviously get their gentlemanly education, but after that there was free state education for every child under 10. They're still separated into girls and boys. There was also the start of, because obviously the railways were here, people started to travel about the country more and more as it became more and more easy to do so. So people used their holiday time, which wasn't very off a lot, especially if you were a factory worker. So the little time they did get off, they did manage to escape to see the seaside, and became really popular in the Victorian times, like Brighton, and a lot of the seaside towns still have a lot of their Victorian like promenades and their piers as well, and having fun fairs on them and all sorts of things like this. So it became a really popular tradition to go to the British seaside for your holidays. And there was the invention of photography as well, that became super popular and now it's in all our phones and stuff. So that was, we also had Sunday schools, and the Catholic religion was now back allowed in the country, and it was kind of religion in general in this era was declining, obviously with more scientific progress and stuff. People didn't necessarily think that it fitted in with how things were going and what they were discovering at this time. Also, a lot of our Christmas traditions come from the Victorian era, especially as Queen Victoria had a German husband and a lot of German lineage, so a lot of the German traditions like Christmas trees and Father Christmas and putting candles and decorating stuff, and Christmas cards kind of all happened at this time, especially as it is Christmassy time at the moment. And we had a lot of great authors and things about this time, painters as well. So we had people like Charles Rennie Mackintosh who were making things. We also had the Pre-Raphaelite brothers, John Ruskin, William Morris, which we'll get into a little bit later. We also had books from Charles Dickens that was a social commentary on the era as well. We also had the Bronte sisters writing their novels. We had George Eliot, Thomas Hardy writing things like Tess of the D'Urbervilles and all those classic books. We also had books that reflected the sort of notions of the era and their fascination with like monsters and ghosts and the dead and all sorts of stuff like that. So we had books like Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, and obviously we had detective books as well to reflect all the flipping murder that was happening at the time. So we had the invention of Sherlock Holmes as well, and all sorts of things that have changed, still affecting our society now. And the kind of, we'll get into the architecture now, as we spoke about William Morris and things. So there was quite a few different architectural styles over this period. It's kind of, they picked and choose what they kind of liked. The main kind of focus was a romantic medieval Gothic revival, so you'll see a lot of Victorian buildings sort of look like castles and they're always quite dark inside, and you can always tell like some of them are done in this bright red brick, especially in places like Manchester, Cardiff Docks as well. Their old dock building is red brick, and a few other. They used to use a lot of steel, a lot of glass, especially glass roofs as well. And they also had conservatories and things put on their houses. So some notable buildings that you would recognise and think are Victorian is the Westminster, so the whole Houses of Parliament. The building that they are in now, it was all built in the Victorian period. Also the Royal Albert Hall and the Forth Bridge, the Bristol suspension bridge was one of the first and longest suspension bridges as well. So the Gothic style was kind of associated with reawakening and just harping back to the medieval castles. So there's lots of turrets, lots of stained glass, lots of towers, lots of intricate detail on them as well. And then we had another opposing style, which was the arts and crafts movement. So this was at the end of this era, so from the 1880s till the 1920s. And the two major players were William Morris and John Ruskin, and it kind of stood for traditional craftsmanship using simple forms and often used medieval, romantic or folk styles for their decorations. It was kind of a social protest against the inhumanity, like the loss of humanity. Most of the industrial products was kind of just all mass made. They didn't have any like soul to them, they thought, so they wanted to create things that hark back to more traditional ways of making things and bringing back proper craftsmen and women to make them. So it was extremely anti-industrial, and they were trying to not lose those crafts that were built up as a country over the many centuries. They used a lot of nature and animals to inspire their prints, especially if you've seen any William Morris prints here. He has like patterns of flowers and birds, especially within his designs, and it's all supposed to kind of hark back to those traditional times. And it was all handcrafted. Later on, they did get into producing their own socially acceptable like factories where they would treat their employees properly and give them like decent working and living conditions as well. But to start off with, they all were hand produced and handmade, and they also expanded into architecture as well. So later on in our little overview at the end, we'll see an arts and crafts house. So it kind of looks a bit medieval, like harping back to the Tudor kind of style of house, but it has the more modern interior. They were quite light and airy and not as dark as the normal Victorian way was. There wasn't so many patterned wallpapers and very ornate over the top decorations inside. And in Scotland they had a designer and artist called Rennie Mackintosh, who was slightly later. He kind of spurred off on his own little tangent of the arts and crafts movement. So if you've ever seen the Glasgow School of Art before it burnt down, and some of his actual house up near the locks just outside Glasgow, then he kind of takes the natural world as his inspiration for line and form, and uses that in his architecture. But it kind of is a cross between the arts and crafts movement by using the nature in it, but moving more into the Art Nouveau, where you use the kind of the influence of the shapes and the lines and the curves of nature to inspire your design. So he was kind of forefronting the Art Nouveau movement. It had quite a lot of Gothic features, but you kind of tell that it's slightly moving into a bit more of the modernism that comes in the later periods. And it has quite a dark wooden interior normally in his builds, so it's quite dark, but he then brings in a lot of light and colour through small stained glass windows, and that have like flowers in them, and he'd have really ornate white rooms that had details of flowers and nature in them as well. So it was quite a contrast between the normal houses that were being furnished earlier on in this time period. So a lot of the houses did have quite dark pattern wallpapers, wooden paneling, tiled floors, and if you were lucky enough you'd have a servants bit as well. It wouldn't have been as extensive as the Georgian era, and if you were middle class you were probably more likely to find a maid as well to help you, and a nanny as well. So in the Victorian era, because they were traveling about the continent, the world a lot more. They were bringing back a lot more like worldly stuff. There was a lot of plants as well. So obviously at this time period the Kew Gardens was kind of up and running. A lot of their original greenhouses and things are Victorian and steel made, and they'd bring back like exotic plants, and this was also reflected in people's homes as well. People would have little orangeries or green rooms to kind of sit in, and they'd have plants and lots of travel and exotic sort of things. And even the Queen had some of her best advisors were Indians, and I think there was a movie made about it the other year, but it was a very interracial time period if you were a certain class, and obviously a lot of varied life and amounts of living depending on your social and monetary status as well. So I found some fun facts about what happened over this time period. So in 1837 the Royal Institute of Architects was founded, and that was alongside the Royal College of Art in Somerset House as well, and Euston train station first opened as well. In 38 the National Gallery was opened, and in 39 the first Royal Regatta, where all the fancy royal boats go down the Thames, that first happened. And the British first took control over Hong Kong, and the Afghanistan war started as well at that time and lasted for pretty much the whole time. In 1840 the Queen got married, and chimney sweeps, an act came in so that chimney sweeps had to be over the age of 21 to work, because they were sending kids up the chimney to clean them out. In 41 Kew Gardens opened, and in 42 there was an Antarctic expedition, and the first ever Christmas card was sent as well. In 45 a drunken man smashed a vase in the National Museum, and it apparently took months to repair, and it was also the first university boat race as well. In 1846 the Scott Monument was erected in Edinburgh, and the first electric telegraph company was founded as well. In 47 Westminster Building, as we know it, where the House of Commons and House of Lords is, was first opened, and the Vegetarian Society was formed, so it's not a new thing. And in 48 the Public Health Act came into act and made healthcare and conditions a lot better for people, or tried to anyway. In 1850 the first telegraph cable under the Channel to France was first introduced, and in 52 the Great Ormond Street Hospital admitted their first patient, and now it's a well-known children's hospital. In 53 the first public aquarium opened in London Zoo. In 55 something known as the Devil Footprints appeared in the snow in Devon, some strange footprints that nobody knew about and they thought it was the devil. In 55 the National Portrait Gallery was founded and later opened in 59. In 58 the Wedding March song, so the song that everyone plays at the wedding, was popularised and everyone started using it. And there was the Great Stink, so because all the sewage went into the River Thames, it stunk so bad that no one along the Thames could do any work or go anywhere near it. In 61 the first steam merry-go-round happened, and Thomas Cook had its first holiday package to Paris, and Thomas Cook has now changed its name, but it's still going strong. In 1862 scarlet fever was epidemic of scarlet fever. And in 65 they introduced the first ever speed limit, which was 2 miles per hour in the centre of town, and if you're in the country, a whopping 4 miles per hour. It's getting dizzy heights of speed there. And then in 66 the post office introduced their hexagon-shaped post boxes, which are still about. And in 67 the Women's Suffrage Society first was organised, and in 68 the first set of traffic lights were introduced in Parliament Square. In 69 Sainsbury's, which is a food store, it first opened in Derby. And in 1870 the Red Cross was founded, and they helped with the war stuff and raising money for them. In 75 there was an Arctic expedition to get to the North Pole. In 1778 there was the first ever Wimbledon tennis match at the All England Club, and in 1878 the first weekly weather report started, so we needed to know whether it was raining every single day. And in 1880 there was the Great Fog that lasted for 3 months and engulfed much of London, and Greenwich Mean Time was the standard all over the country, because at that point every part of the country had a completely different time. And in 1781 the town of Godalming, where that woman had given birth to rabbits, was the first town to be illuminated with electric lights, and it was actually produced by hydroelectricity. And in 1883 the Royal College of Music opened, and in 1884 the NSPCC, the Cruelty Prevention of Children, was founded, and in 85 professional football was a legal thing, and there were lots of teams set up all over this time. The Victorians loved football. And in 86 Crufts, the dog show, was first put on, and in 88 we had the Whitechapel Murders by Jack the Ripper, and also the first recorded film, and that was in Leeds as well. So there's some fun random things that happened during this time period. So I am going to leave you now with the rest of the furnishing of this grand, posh, upper class Victorian house, and you'll see all the other bits and some extra stuff in the thing. So I will see you for the next era in the next part.